Hey there! Welcome to Midnight Memoirs. I hope you're settling in for the night. We like to believe our homes are safe havens where nothing can hurt us. But sometimes walls and locks aren't enough to keep everything out. Tonight, I've got a collection of stories about home invaders, thieves, and supernatural guests that prove we aren't always as alone as we think. Before we dive into the dark, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're joining me from. And if you enjoy the vibe, please like and subscribe to support the channel. So, pull the blankets up tight, get comfortable, and let's get started. From a very young age, I was taught to be careful. A lot of that came from my granny, who lived next door to us and had a talent for turning every lesson into a warning. She was a total fearmonger, and she didn't sugarcoat anything. According to her, the woods were full of things that could kill you if you weren't paying attention. She told me not to wait for the school bus before the sun came up, because wild hogs would gut me if they got the chance. She told me that if I ever heard a sound like a woman screaming off in the distance, it wasn't a person in trouble, it was a panther. She told me stories about animals dragging people into the brush, about hunters who vanished, about how easy it was to underestimate the land and pay for it with your life. At the time, I didn't know how much of what she said was exaggerated and how much of it was rooted in reality. I just knew that I grew up with the constant understanding that danger wasn't imaginary. It wasn't something that only existed in cities or bad neighborhoods. It lived right outside our doors. That kind of upbringing makes you cautious by default. Even as a kid, I was always listening, always watching the tree line, always aware of how quiet things could suddenly get. When I was 15, all I wanted was to feel normal for a night. I asked my mom if I could walk down the road to a neighbor's house to hang out with my friends. They lived at the front of our dead-end country road, not far in terms of distance, but far enough that you were completely exposed while walking there. My friends Yancy and Eric, she were planning to play video games and watch Family Guy, nothing wild or rebellious. Just teenage boredom and junk food. My mom was hesitant. She always was. After some back and forth, some reassurance, and probably a bit of teenage annoyance on my part, she finally said yes. I grabbed my shoes, pulled on a hoodie, and headed out. The night was clear, and the moon was full. It lit up the road enough that I didn't bother grabbing a flashlight. That seemed important at the time, like proof that I wasn't scared, like I was grown enough to handle a simple walk down a country road. Our house sat next to Granny's, and past her place was a wide-open pasture. The pasture stretched alongside the road for a long distance, nothing but grass and shadow, bordered by thick woods on the far side. It was the kind of space that felt fine during the day and completely different at night. I made it about halfway down the stretch in front of that pasture when I heard something. I can't tell you exactly what it sounded like because it wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't a scream or a growl. It was just something. A noise that didn't belong. It was enough to make every hair on my body stand up. I stopped dead in my tracks. I stood there, holding my breath, listening. I expected to hear it again. Another step, another sound, something to confirm that I hadn't imagined it. But nothing came. The night went silent again, the kind of silence that feels heavier after it's been broken. I tried to talk myself out of it. I told myself I was being stupid. I told myself Granny had filled my head with nonsense my whole life, and that this was exactly why she did it, to scare me over nothing. I took a step forward, and then another, but my heart was pounding, and my instincts were screaming louder than my logic. Before I could argue with myself any further, I turned around and ran. I ran all the way back to my mom's house like a coward, shoes pounding against the dirt road, breath coming fast and shallow. When I got inside, I must have looked shaken because my mom didn't even tease me. She just looked at me, took in my face, and asked what was wrong. I tried to explain without sounding ridiculous. but I don't think I did a very good job of it. All I knew was that something out there didn't feel right. I had my learner's permit at the time, and after seeing how rattled I was, she handed me the keys and told me to drive instead. I didn't argue. I grabbed them and left immediately, relieved to be inside a vehicle with doors and windows and headlights. I made it to Yancey's place without incident. The normalcy of it all settled my nerves pretty quickly. His mum had cooked pork chops, mashed potatoes and gravy, and we ate until we were uncomfortably full. We played video games, watched TV, and eventually turned into exhausted zombies on the couch. By the end of the night, the fear I'd felt on the road had faded enough that I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. The next morning, I woke up to news that made my stomach drop. My cousin, who lived about a quarter-mile farther down the road from us, had woken up to a horrifying sight. His back porch and the siding of his house were splattered with blood. Not a little. A lot. Enough that it was immediately obvious something violent had happened right there. They figured something large had killed a deer nearby. Given where we lived, that wasn't unheard of. What changed everything was what happened next. They called in a tracker. The tracker followed the trail and confirmed what my granny had warned me about my entire childhood. A large panther had passed through the area. It had come through my cousin's yard, into the pasture next to Granny's house, and then disappeared back into the woods. The tracker said it had passed less than 200 feet from where I had been walking the night before. That realization hit me hard. The spot where I froze, where I felt that sudden, unexplained fear, where I decided to turn back instead of pushing forward, was right there. I hadn't imagined anything. I hadn't been paranoid. My body had picked up on something my mind couldn't explain yet. I don't know if the sound I heard was the panther itself or something else reacting to it. I don't know if it had already been there watching or if it passed through shortly after. What I do know is that it was close enough to matter. Close enough that if I'd kept walking, if I'd brushed off that feeling one more time, things could have gone very differently. From that point on, I drove everywhere at night. I didn't walk that road in the dark again. Not out of embarrassment, not because of fear-mongering stories, but because I had proof that the danger my granny talked about wasn't imaginary. That experience taught me something that stuck with me long after I left that place. Growing up surrounded by wilderness isn't romantic. It's not just starry skies and quiet nights. It's understanding that you are not at the top of the food chain once you step outside your front door. It's learning to respect instincts that don't come with explanations. Sometimes fear isn't weakness. Sometimes it's your body doing exactly what it's supposed to do. To this day, whenever people laugh about being scared in the dark or tease someone for getting spooked in the woods, I think about that road. I think about how close I came to walking straight into something that could have killed me. And I remember that in places like the Big Thicket, the things that go bump in the night don't need superstition to be terrifying. They're real. When I was 3 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard a baby crying. The sound wasn't distant or muffled. It was close, too close. It sounded like it was coming from underneath my bed. At that age, I didn't feel fear the way an adult would. I was confused more than anything. I climbed out of bed and bent down to look underneath, expecting to see maybe a toy or nothing at all. Instead, I saw a baby. I remember it very clearly, even now. The baby was lying under my bed, crying softly. I don't remember feeling alarmed. I remember feeling curious and concerned, the way a child does when they think something needs help. I reached out to touch the baby, intending to pick him up. The moment my hand should have made contact, the baby disappeared. Immediately the crying started again. This time, it was coming from my closet. I stood up, walked over and opened the closet door. Inside, sitting in an open plastic bin on top of some toys and stuffed animals, was the same baby. I don't know how I knew this, but I remember thinking very clearly that the baby was a boy. That thought felt certain, not imagined. He was lying there, crying, just like before. I don't remember how long I stood there. Eventually, I left my room and went to my parents' bedroom. What I found there was strange in a way that didn't make sense to me at the time. Neither of my parents were in bed. That alone was unusual. Even more unusual was where they were. They were both in the bathroom together. That was something that simply never happened in our house. My parents were always extremely private about the bathroom. My mom was crying. She was standing without her underwear on, as if she had just stood up from the toilet. My dad was with her, trying to calm her down. I didn't understand what was happening, but I could tell something was wrong. I mentioned the baby. I don't remember exactly what I said, just that I talked about a crying baby. My dad reacted immediately and sharply. He told me to go back to bed. There was no discussion, no questions, just an order. I obeyed. The next morning, when I woke up, my parents were gone. Instead, my babysitter was there. She was a neighbor, someone I liked a lot and considered my best friend at the time. She was sitting there watching me. I didn't think much of it, but it felt strange in hindsight. A day or two later, my parents took me for a drive. I remember being told very clearly that I was not allowed to look out the windows of the car. They said there were bad people outside holding up bad pictures. I didn't understand what that meant, but I remember trying very hard to obey. At some point during the drive, my mom rolled down her window and started screaming at people outside. She was yelling curse words, furious and emotional. I remember her shouting that she wasn't there because she wanted to be, that she was sick, and that it wasn't her fault. I didn't know who she was talking to or why. When we arrived at the building, I stayed in the car. A woman who worked there came out and sat with me while my mom went inside. She put up those silver foil sun visors on the windows so I couldn't see out. She mostly just sat there quietly, watching me while I read a book. Anytime someone tried to come near the car, she would subtly block them or redirect them away. I asked her why people were acting weird outside. She told me they were just mean. That was the end of it, as far as my childhood memory goes. Life moved on. I didn't think about that night very often as I grew up. It faded into the background as something strange but distant, like many early childhood memories do. Years later, when I was around 19 or 20, something changed. I finally told my mother about something I had been carrying for a long time. I told her that I had been raped as a teenager. She already knew about the assault, but what she didn't know was that I had become pregnant afterward. I told her I had hidden the pregnancy and later suffered a miscarriage when I was 15 or 16. I also told her about the depression and suicidal thoughts I had been dealing with for years. I explained that a large part of it came from the miscarriage. I felt overwhelming guilt, grief, and self-blame. I believed at the time that I was being punished. I told her that I felt like the spirit of my baby was angry with me for failing to protect him and keep him alive. I admitted that for almost a year after the miscarriage, I had hallucinated the sound of a baby crying. Even after it stopped, I still felt like he was there, watching me, disappointed in me. I was terrified that I was losing my mind. My mother didn't interrupt me. She listened quietly. Then she did something I never expected. She went and got a journal. It was her journal from the year I was 3, turning 4. She opened it to a specific page and told me to read it. Starting at a certain point, only if I thought I could handle it. I didn't read it right away. I took the journal with me and waited until later that day, alone. Curiosity eventually won. I needed to know. When I read it, everything changed. When I was 3 years old, my mother had been pregnant. She wrote about how conflicted she felt at the time. She and my father had been fighting a lot, and she felt immense guilt about getting pregnant when their marriage felt unstable, close to divorce. Despite that, she wanted to keep the baby. She wrote that she knew how much I loved having an older sister. My cousin had been adopted by my mom due to abuse in her own home, and I adored her. I had been begging for a younger sibling, any sibling, for a long time. My mother knew pregnancy was hard on her physically and mentally, so she decided to keep it a secret. No one knew except her doctor. Then, in the middle of the night during her second trimester, she went into early labor. The baby didn't survive. It was a boy. The part that destroyed her the most, according to her journal, happened immediately after. After the labor was over, while she was still bleeding and in pain, I came into the room asking about the crying baby. Reading that made my hands shake. After they sent me back to bed that night, my parents contacted a neighbor they trusted. That neighbor sent my babysitter over to stay with me while they went to the hospital. The special doctor I remembered was a Planned Parenthood clinic. The bad pictures outside the car were graphic images of aborted fetuses held by protesters. The woman who sat with me in the car was a volunteer, and my mother hadn't gone there by choice. She had gone because pieces of my dead baby brother were still inside her body, and if they weren't removed, she could have died. The procedure saved her life. Everything I remembered as fragments suddenly had context. The crying baby I heard at 3 years old had been my brother. The baby I thought was a boy had actually been a boy. The bathroom scene, the babysitter, the secrecy, the drive, the yelling, the strangers outside, all of it finally made sense. I sat there with the journal in my lap, completely numb. I don't know what explanation fits this story. I don't know if it was coincidence, childhood perception, trauma, or something else entirely. I know how it sounds. I know how people would try to explain it away. All I know is that there are details I couldn't have known. I heard a baby crying at the exact moment my mother lost her son. Years later, after losing my own pregnancy, I heard a baby crying again. Whether it was psychological, emotional, spiritual, or something beyond that, I can't say. I don't claim certainty. I don't claim proof. I only know what I experienced and what later aligned in ways that still leave me shaken. That knowledge didn't make everything better. It didn't magically heal my grief or erase my depression. But it reframed my fear. I wasn't going insane. I wasn't alone in those experiences. There was context. There was history. I don't tell this story to convince anyone of anything. I don't even fully understand it myself. I tell it because it happened, and because the truth, no matter how uncomfortable or strange, deserves to be acknowledged. Some memories don't fade. They wait. I grew up in a small town, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else, where nothing really happens, and where boredom feels like a permanent state of being. When I turned 18, my mates and I started making regular trips into the city. That was our escape. We'd pile into a car, drive for hours, get high, and spend the night bouncing between clubs and rave parties. It felt exciting, dangerous in a controlled way, like we were finally brushing up against something bigger than ourselves. Most of us had done it plenty of times by then. We knew the rhythm of the night, how to pace ourselves, how to stay out of trouble. But one night, we decided to bring along a new guy. He was a mate of mine, someone I'd known for a while, but he had never done drugs before. He was curious, eager, and clearly wanted to prove something. But before we even left town, we set one rule. Since he was new, I was responsible for him. I had to babysit him all night. If he freaked out, if he got sick, if he started acting stupid, that was on me. I agreed without much thought. I'd handled worse. So, the four of us drove into the city that night, buzzing with anticipation. The lights, the noise, the sense that anything could happen. Once we got there, we dropped a few pills and headed straight into the clubs. Music pounding, bodies everywhere, sweat, flashing lights. For about 30 minutes, everything seemed fine. Then, the new guy started to wig out. At first it was subtle. He got quieter, then jittery. His eyes darted around too much. He started breathing faster, asking the same questions over and over. I could see it coming a mile away. He was overwhelmed. So I did what I always did in situations like that. I took him outside. We walked away from the club, away from the noise, just wandering through the city streets. I talked to him, kept his focus on normal things, told him stories, pointed out random stuff. Slowly, it worked. His breathing calmed down. He started laughing again. Eventually, it felt like we were just two mates out for a late-night walk, chatting like nothing was wrong. That's when he started getting mouthy. This guy had always had a bit of an ego, even sober. High, it got worse. For reasons I still don't fully understand, he suddenly started bragging. He told me he was a big-time dealer in the city, that he knew people, that he was connected. It was obvious nonsense. He didn't even live in the city, and I knew exactly what his life looked like back home. I tried to shut him up gently at first. I laughed it off, told him to lower his voice, told him he was talking shit, but he just kept going, getting louder, more confident, more stupid by the second. Then he practically yelled, "I've got every major dealer's phone number in my phone." The moment the words left his mouth, something shifted. The guy walking in front of us, someone I hadn't even noticed until that second, stopped dead in his tracks. He turned around slowly and faced us. He was tall, at least 6 feet, maybe taller, completely bald. His head looked almost polished under the streetlights. He was wearing a long trench coat that went all the way down his body, hiding everything underneath. There was nothing flashy about him, nothing exaggerated, but his presence was overwhelming. He didn't say a word. He just stared. The way he looked at us wasn't curious or confused. It was cold, measuring, like he was assessing something. My entire body locked up. My mouthy mate went quiet instantly. We stood there frozen, staring back at him, the city noise suddenly feeling distant and unreal. Then, without breaking eye contact, the guy stepped sideways and slipped into a convenience store right next to us. That was all it took. My mate leaned in close to me, his voice suddenly sharp and terrified, and said one word, "Run!" So we ran. Not a casual jog, not fast walking. We sprinted like our lives depended on it. We bolted down the street, turned corners without looking back, lungs burning, hearts pounding out of our chests. We didn't stop until we physically couldn't anymore. When we finally did stop, we were doubled over, gasping for air, and adrenaline flooding our systems. By then, we were high as hell. We were already high before, but the fear, the sprint, the pure panic had taken it to another level. Our brains were buzzing. Everything felt sharp and intense. After a few minutes, once we were sure no one was chasing us, that fear turned into nervous laughter. The kind of laughter that comes from surviving something without fully understanding it. We told ourselves we'd overreacted, that the guy was probably just some random we'd freaked ourselves out over. Drugs do that. The city does that. We laughed about how ridiculous it must have looked, us running like idiots through the streets. Eventually, we decided to head back to the club. We didn't take the main roads. We cut through a park, then ducked into back streets, then slipped through narrow alleys. We wandered for a long time, maybe 30 minutes or more, just talking, calming down, letting the night settle again. At no point did I feel like we were being followed. At no point did I see that guy again. By the time we reached the club, I'd almost convinced myself the whole thing was nothing. We went inside and took seats in the outdoor area. It was quieter there, away from the main dance floor. We sat down, leaned back, and started chatting. I was still watching my mate closely, making sure he was okay. Then he froze. He leaned into me so slightly that no one else would notice and whispered, "That trench coat guy is standing in the corner watching us." My stomach dropped. I looked up, and there he was. Same guy, same height, same bald head, same long trench coat, standing in the shadows at the edge of the outdoor area, completely still, facing us, watching. Every instinct in my body screamed to run again, but this time I forced myself to think. We were in a crowded club. There were security guards everywhere, cameras, lights, people. If I panicked now, my mate would spiral completely. It was his first time on drugs, and I could see how close he already was to losing it. So I lied. I told him it wasn't the same guy. I told him it just looked similar. I told him there were heaps of people dressed weird in the city, especially around clubs. I spoke calmly, confidently, like there was nothing wrong at all. He believed me, or at least he wanted to. We stayed seated. I made sure of it. For the next 6 hours, I refused to let us get up. Every time my mate said he wanted to dance, I redirected him. I kept him talking. I kept him distracted. Thankfully, he was off his head enough that it wasn't hard. He rambled. He laughed. He forgot things mid-sentence. The entire time, the trench coat guy didn't move. Not once. He stood there for hours in the same spot, watching us. He didn't talk to anyone. He didn't drink. He didn't dance. He didn't check his phone. He didn't even shift his weight. Every time I glanced up, he was still there, eyes fixed in our direction. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was security. Maybe he was just some weirdo. Maybe I was projecting fear onto a stranger because of what happened earlier, but deep down, none of those explanations felt right. Eventually, the club closed. It was around 7 in the morning. The sky outside was starting to lighten. People slowly filtered out, exhausted, sweaty, laughing, arguing. I kept my eyes locked on the corner. At some point, he was gone. No dramatic exit, no movement that I noticed. He was just not there anymore. We left shortly after and drove home in silence. The city faded behind us, replaced by long roads and early morning light. None of us talked about what happened right away. It felt too strange, too heavy. To this day, I don't know who that man was. I've gone over it again and again in my head. Part of me thinks he was involved in the drug scene in a serious way. A big player. Someone who didn't appreciate loud, stupid kids bragging about things they knew nothing about. Another part of me thinks he could have been a Fed, or someone pretending to be one, or something else entirely. What scares me the most isn't that he stared at us. It's how he found us again. When we ran hard. Full sprint for blocks and blocks. Then we stopped for a long time, laughing, calming down. Then we walked a completely different route back to the club, cutting through parks, alleys, side streets. We were fit, wiry kids moving fast and unpredictably. Yet somehow, he ended up back at the club before us, or maybe he never lost us at all. The thought that unsettles me is this. He could have been behind us the entire time, in the dark park where we sat alone, in the narrow alleyways, watching, waiting, silent. Then, standing there in the club for 6 hours, close enough to reach out if he wanted to, and never once revealing his intentions. I don't know what he wanted. I'm glad I never found out. Some nights aren't scary because something happens. They're scary because something almost does. And you never know how close you really were to crossing a line you can't come back from. I had just given birth to my son. He was only a couple of months old, still so small that my entire world revolved around his sleep schedule. At that stage, he usually woke up around 2 or 3 in the morning, but I had gotten very good at anticipating it. I could hear him stir before he fully woke up and started crying. I'd get up, warm his bottle, and be back at his crib before he even had the chance to fuss. It became an easy, almost peaceful routine, especially during those quiet, early morning hours. While I fed him, I would usually stand by our bedroom window. Our bedroom was over the garage, which sat closer to the road than the rest of the house. The window faced the front of the property, and from there I could see the road, the driveway, and just the beginning of the walkway that led to our front door. I couldn't see the door itself, but I could see anyone who came up the drive. Around that same time every night, the newspaper delivery guy would come through our cul-de-sac. I got used to watching him. He'd pull up, get out of his car, grab the paper, and walk toward the house. It was oddly comforting, like a reminder that the world was still moving, even while everything else felt suspended in darkness and quiet. That night started exactly the same as every other night. I woke up, heard my son stirring, made his bottle, and started feeding him. I went to the window expecting to see the familiar routine play out. After a bit, the paper guy finally showed up. He parked his car, stepped out, and grabbed the paper. Nothing seemed off at first. He started walking up toward the front door. But right before he reached the point where he would normally disappear from my view onto the walkway, he stopped dead in his tracks. He didn't just pause for a second. He froze. Then, in a clear, loud voice that carried through the quiet street, he said, "What the hell is that?" He said it slowly, with pauses between each word, like someone trying to process something they couldn't understand. There was no panic in his voice, just pure confusion and disbelief. Then he threw the newspaper toward the house and ran back to his car. He didn't jog. He didn't hesitate. He bolted, got in his car, and took off. I felt ice cold all over. I stood there, feeding my son, staring out the window, my mind racing. What was he talking about? What could he have seen? It didn't sound like someone reacting to an animal. People see animals all the time, especially in neighborhoods. You don't react like that to a raccoon or a cat. Something about the way he said it made my stomach drop. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to calm myself, telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. That's when I heard it. It sounded like the front door opening. That was it. That was the moment fear really set in. I immediately tried to wake up my husband. I was whispering his name at first, then shaking him harder, trying to explain what had just happened, but he wouldn't wake up. He was out cold. As I was panicking, another thought hit me. Our dog, Porter, should have been going insane. Porter was a 160-pound American Mastiff. Massive, protective. He slept in the front room every night. Nothing got anywhere near the house without him barking, growling, or alerting everyone. There was no way someone could open the front door without him reacting, but the house was silent. I couldn't get my husband to wake up, and I couldn't just stand there wondering. I put my son back in his crib and headed downstairs. I don't know how to explain the feeling that came over me. It was fear, yes, but also something else. That instinct that kicks in when you feel like you have to protect your family at all costs. My hands were shaking as I reached the bottom of the stairs and turned on the light. Nothing. The front room was empty. The door was closed. Porter was lying there like nothing had happened at all. No signs of anyone being inside. No noise. No movement. I called out, "Hello?" There was no answer. That was it. That's all I ever found. No proof. No explanation. It took me a long time to fall asleep after that. The next morning, I asked everyone in the house if they had heard anything during the night. There were 6 other family members living with us at the time. No one had heard a thing. When I told them what happened, they tried to explain it away. Maybe it was a possum. Maybe Porter had been looking out the window and scared the paper guy. Maybe it was just someone overreacting. I thought about calling the newspaper company. I thought about trying to track down the delivery guy and asking him what he saw, but I never did. Time passed. Life moved on. My son is almost 4 now, and I still don't know what that man saw standing near my front door in the middle of the night. That's what makes it so disturbing. Not because something definitely happened, but because something almost certainly did. And I'll never know what it was. There's no ending to the story, no explanation. Just that moment, frozen in my memory, and the sound of a stranger's voice saying, "What the hell is that?" before running away. This isn't even the worst or scariest thing that's ever happened to me, but it's the one that still makes me question everything. When I was younger, I had a habit of sneaking out of the house at night. It wasn't anything extreme or dangerous, at least not by our standards back then. A group of us would meet up after dark and wander around the neighborhood, getting into what we thought was harmless trouble. Minor mischief, jumping fences, rearranging lawn furniture, dumb teenage stuff that felt thrilling simply because it was forbidden. One of the newer kids in our group lived farther out than the rest of us. His house sat on the opposite side of a farm that separated his neighborhood from ours. The farm wasn't active in any obvious way, just a large stretch of land covered in tall grass, broken only by one lone tree and a few scattered rocks near it. Cutting through the farm saved a lot of time, and honestly, we liked it. It felt like an adventure, like we were slipping through a place we weren't really supposed to be. One night in early autumn, cool and crisp, we wrapped up our activities earlier than usual. We'd hopped a pool fence and rearranged the furniture around it, which felt scandalous at the time, and most of the others headed home. I decided to walk that newer friend back to his place before heading home myself. We cut through the farm as we'd done many times before. The grass was tall, dry, and whispering softly in the breeze. It reached up to my head, and I was about 6 feet tall at the time. The moon was out, casting just enough light to see the tops of the grass swaying like a dark ocean. We reached the familiar spot near the tree where several small boulders were clustered together. They formed natural seats, and we'd stopped there before on other nights. We sat down and talked. The kind of conversation teenagers always have when they feel like the world is closing in on them. Who liked who hated their parents the most, who was going to get out of town first and never look back. It felt important then, like we were planning our escape from something huge and oppressive. Eventually, the conversation slowed. There was a pause, the kind where neither person feels the need to fill the silence immediately. That's when I heard it. A dog barking, far away. It sounded like it was coming from the farmhouse at the edge of the property. That didn't strike me as strange at first. Farms have dogs. Dogs bark at night. I barely registered it. Then something made me look up. Rising above the tall grass, silhouetted against the dim light of the sky, were 3 shapes. They were shaped like people. Not together, not clustered. They were spread far apart from each other, separated by hundreds of feet, and they were completely still. No shifting, no swaying, just standing there, tall and motionless, looming over the grass. This wasn't a field with scarecrows. There were no extra trees, no farm equipment, nothing that should have created shapes like that. I knew the layout of that land. We'd crossed it dozens of times. My body locked up. I couldn't speak at first. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Slowly, I turned my head toward my friend and asked, barely above a whisper, if he could see them. I didn't even finish explaining what I meant. He nodded. That nod did something to me that I still have trouble describing. It took this from a strange visual trick into something undeniably real. We were both seeing the same thing. Neither of us moved. We didn't dare. The figures didn't move either. They stayed rooted in place, dark and indistinct, like shadows given shape. They were taller than the grass by at least a couple of feet. There was no way they were people crouching or animals standing oddly. They were upright, watching, or at least facing in our direction. We sat there, frozen, staring at them. Then the growling started. It was close, too close. A deep, low growl coming from somewhere in the grass, no more than 10 feet away from us. It wasn't distant like the barking had been. This was right on top of us, hidden in the grass, surrounding us. That broke whatever spell had locked us in place. We jumped up and ran. We didn't look back. We tore through the grass as fast as we could, tripping, stumbling. We fueled entirely by panic. Nothing chased us, not the dog, not the figures. There were no footsteps behind us, no sounds of pursuit. That almost made it worse. We burst out onto a suburban street and ducked behind a parked car, crouching there, gasping for air. The moon slipped behind a cloud just then, leaving only a thin, pale strip of light that seemed to spotlight the two of us while everything else fell into darkness. In that moment, I believed in ghosts. Not as an idea, not as a fun, scary story. I believed because I had no other explanation. What we'd seen didn't fit into anything I understood about the world. We stayed like that for a while, shaking, whispering, replaying what had just happened. Eventually, we went to my friend's house. We stayed there far longer than we needed to, or trying desperately to come up with a reasonable explanation. Trees we hadn't noticed, scarecrows put up for fall, shadows and fear feeding off each other. But there was a problem. I still had to get home. The only realistic way back was through that field. And more than that, we needed to prove it to ourselves. If we didn't go back, the fear would live forever in that unanswered space. We needed to see it empty. We needed to see nothing there. So we armed ourselves with aluminum baseball bats, which felt laughably inadequate but better than nothing. We stepped back into the field, our nerves screaming at us to turn around. We made our way to the tree and the stones again, every sound amplified, every movement in the grass making us flinch. We stopped and scanned the field. There was nothing, no figures, no shadows rising above the grass, no dog, no sound beyond the wind. The horizon was exactly as it should have been, just tall grass stretching into darkness. No trees where there shouldn't be any, no scarecrows, nothing. There was no explanation waiting for us. That didn't bring comfort. It made it worse. I ran the rest of the way home, terrified out of my mind, convinced that at any second something would step out of the grass behind me. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those shapes standing there, perfectly still. Most people don't believe the story, or they think we exaggerated, or that it was just fear and imagination feeding into each other. I don't blame them. It sounds ridiculous, like a creepypasta, like something designed to be unsettling rather than something that actually happened. But those grasses were taller than my head, and the figures stood well above them. Years later, the farm was sold and turned into a housing development. Streets, homes, driveways. Life moved in where the grass once stood. Sometimes, when I think about it, I wonder if the builders ever noticed the stones near that tree. I wonder if they built too close to them. I don't know what we saw. I don't pretend to understand it. I've mostly put it out of my mind, filed it away as something I can't resolve. But I haven't forgotten. And to this day, only one other person believes me completely. The friend who was sitting beside me in that field. This happened more than 10 years ago, during a period in my life when I was not mentally well. I need to be upfront about one thing before I go any further. I am, and always have been, a believer in the occult. I believe in God, I believe in ghosts, I believe in the supernatural. That belief system matters to this story because it shaped how I understood what was happening to me at the time. Back then, I was deeply interested in trying to communicate with the dead. I owned several Ouija boards and spent a lot of time using them. It started out feeling harmless, even exciting. After months of doing this, I began to believe that I was some kind of medium. I felt more sensitive, more open. At first, I thought that meant I was special. Then, things started to change. I began to feel off, not in a vague way, but in a way that scared me. My thoughts became dark in a way that felt completely foreign to who I was. I started having intrusive thoughts about suicide, rape, murder, torture. These weren't fleeting ideas. They were vivid, constant, and horrifying. Even the milder ones made me feel sick to my stomach. They went against everything I believed about myself as a person. The guilt was overwhelming. I felt filthy just for having the thoughts. I couldn't understand why my mind was producing them, and the more I tried to suppress them, the worse they became. Eventually, it got so bad that I developed a compulsion to wash my hands constantly. I washed them until my skin cracked and bled. I couldn't stop. No matter how much I scrubbed, I never felt clean. At that point, I genuinely believed I was losing my mind. I knew something was very wrong, and I finally worked up the courage to talk to my mom. That conversation was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I told her everything. The thoughts, the fear, the guilt, the hand washing, how scared I was of myself. She listened, took me seriously, and told me I needed to see a doctor. After that conversation, I started researching obsessive-compulsive disorder on my own. A lot of it lined up disturbingly well. The intrusive thoughts, the compulsions, the overwhelming guilt. It made sense in a clinical way, but it didn't fully explain how sudden and extreme everything felt to me. About a week later, I went to see our family doctor. I was 16 years old and absolutely terrified of being labeled mentally ill. Sitting in that office, I felt small and ashamed. I told him everything I'd been experiencing, my voice shaking the entire time. He listened, wrote out a prescription for Prozac, and strongly recommended that I start seeing a psychiatrist. I went home with the paperwork, numb but also oddly relieved. There was a plan, a path forward. I told my mum what the doctor had said, and we started talking about recovery and treatment. A few days later, while trying to distract myself online, I ended up reading an article about Ouija boards. That's when I stumbled across something I had never heard of before: demonic oppression. Reading that article felt like being punched in the chest. According to the description, demonic oppression isn't possession. It's not a demon inside you. It's the idea of a negative entity attaching itself to you, influencing you, wearing you down mentally and emotionally, trying to break you. The symptoms listed were terrifyingly familiar. Intrusive thoughts, despair, self-loathing, obsession with cleanliness, sudden personality changes, a sense of being watched or manipulated, and one of the most commonly cited causes, using Ouija boards. I know how that sounds. I know how easy it is to dismiss, but at that moment, it felt like someone had written an article about my exact experience. I became convinced that this explained everything, that something had latched onto me and was feeding on my fear and guilt. I immediately started researching how to get rid of demonic oppression. The advice was consistent: get rid of the boards, dispose of them properly. Don't just throw them away intact. Break them, separate the pieces. Make sure the planchettes never touch the boards again. Dispose of everything separately so nothing remains connected. So that's what I did. I broke the boards. I separated every piece carefully. I put everything into different garbage bags, making sure nothing touched. Those bags sat in our trash for a day or two, waiting for garbage day. Then garbage day came. I heard the garbage truck outside, making its way down the street. My heart dropped when I realized I had forgotten to throw out some used kitty litter. I ran downstairs toward the front door, planning to toss it out quickly before the truck passed. At the bottom of the stairs, my dad stopped me. He started mocking me for having to clean up cat shit, laughing loudly, making jokes like he always did. Normally, I would have laughed back or snapped at him, but I was already on edge. I didn't make eye contact. I ignored him and rushed past, annoyed and flustered. I threw the kitty litter into the bin just as the garbage truck lifted it. I watched as the bags containing the Ouija boards were dumped into the truck and disappeared. When I went back inside, the house was completely quiet. I called out to my dad. No answer. I waited a few seconds, confused. Then my mum walked in the door from work. I asked her where Dad had gone. She looked at me strangely and said he hadn't been home yet. He was supposed to stop at the grocery store on the way back. I told her that was impossible. I told her I had just spoken to him in person 2 minutes earlier. She said that couldn't be true because she had just been on the phone with him and he was still at the A&P. My heart started racing. I ran to the phone and called him. He answered from the grocery store, completely confused by what I was saying. He confirmed he had not been home at all. I hung up shaking. No one else had been in the house. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. It looked exactly like my father. It sounded exactly like my father. Same voice, same mannerisms, same laugh. I am convinced that was the last attempt, the final scare, the final moment of manipulation, meant to make me doubt my sanity one last time. After the boards were gone, everything stopped. Not gradually, not slowly. Overnight. The intrusive thoughts vanished. The compulsive hand-washing stopped. The guilt lifted. The feeling of being watched disappeared. It was like someone flipped a switch. To this day, I'm afraid to think about what might have happened if I had looked my father in the eyes that day. I don't know what I would have seen. I don't know what it was trying to accomplish. I only know that once the boards were gone, whatever had been tormenting me was gone too. You can explain this however you want. Mental illness, stress, coincidence, psychology. All I know is what I lived through, and I've never touched a Ouija board again. The real estate agent who hired us didn't exaggerate. He told us this was the dirtiest house he had seen in his 35 years of selling homes. And the moment we stepped inside, I believed him. The house itself was large, a split level in one of the most affluent areas of town. From the outside, it looked completely normal. Well-kept neighborhood, nice yards, quiet street. Nothing about it suggested what we were about to walk into. But as soon as we opened the front door, it hit us. The smell came first. Stale, sour, heavy. Then the sight of it all sank in. Every surface was coated in grime. Floors were sticky. Counters were buried under layers of filth. Dishes stacked everywhere. Garbage overflowing. Bathrooms that looked like they hadn't been cleaned in years. It wasn't just messy, or it was neglect on a level that made your skin crawl. The agent explained that a single man lived there with his 19-year-old son. The son apparently never left the house and did nothing. The dad worked full-time and clearly didn't care about the state of the place. That explanation made sense logically, but it didn't explain the feeling. From the moment we stepped inside, something felt wrong. My friend and I started cleaning right away, trying to ignore the discomfort. We joked around to lighten the mood, talking about how ridiculous the mess was and how unbelievable it was that people could live like this. But even as we joked, both of us commented on the atmosphere. I said it felt like a torture chamber. She said it felt like dread. Neither of us could really explain what we meant. It wasn't fear, exactly. And it was more like a pressure, a heaviness in the air. The kind of feeling you get when you don't want to turn your back on a room, even though you have no reason for thinking that way. At first we chalked it up to the filth. There's something deeply unsettling about extreme neglect, especially in a place that's supposed to be a home. As we cleaned and things started to look more normal, the feeling eased a bit. The house became brighter. The air felt lighter. We told ourselves that the vibe was just a psychological reaction to how disgusting the place had been. About 5 hours into the day, we split up to work faster. My friends stayed in the kitchen, scrubbing cabinets and appliances. I went to clean the master suite bathroom. The moment I stepped into that bathroom, the feeling came back, stronger. The longer I stayed in there, the worse it got. My chest felt tight. My shoulders were tense. I felt like I was being crowded, even though I was alone. I kept telling myself to hurry up and finish so I could get out of there. I focused on the task, trying not to think about how uncomfortable I felt. I was almost done. Just a few minutes left. That's when it happened. I felt a very clear, very unmistakable slap on my ass. Not a brush, not fabric catching on something. A slap. I yelped out loud and spun around instantly, heart pounding, expecting to see someone standing behind me. The bathroom was empty. No one was there. The door was open and I could see down the hall. Nothing. My friend came running in from the kitchen because my reaction must have been loud. I told her exactly what happened. She looked confused but not alarmed. She told me I must have imagined it, or that the house was getting to my head, that the vibe was messing with me. I didn't argue. What else could I say? I knew what I felt, but there was nothing to prove it. Eventually we brushed it off and went back to work. By the end of the day, we were exhausted. The house looked better, but we were nowhere near finished. We knew we'd need at least another 10 hours the next day. Before leaving, we decided to call a third friend and ask her to come help for a short time the next day. We didn't tell her anything about the house beyond needing help with bathrooms and vacuuming. We didn't mention the feeling. We didn't mention what happened to me. We didn't want to freak her out or sound ridiculous. Day 2 came. The house was already significantly cleaner when we arrived. The worst of the filth was gone. It didn't look nearly as horrifying as it had the day before. The oppressive feeling we'd noticed earlier was mostly gone too, or at least muted. That alone made us more comfortable. Our third friend arrived and got to work. Less than 10 minutes later, she walked into the kitchen where my first friend and I were cleaning. She looked pale, like all the color had drained from her face. She asked us very quietly if either of us felt like someone was watching us. We both said no. She told us she had been touching up one of the bathrooms and kept having to turn around because it felt like someone was standing right behind her, close enough that she could feel breathing on the back of her neck. That's when my stomach dropped. I asked her which bathroom. She said the master suite. My friend and I just looked at each other. The memory of the day before came rushing back all at once. The feeling, the slap, the dread. We hadn't said a word to her about any of it. We all went into the master bathroom together and searched it thoroughly. Cabinets, corners, behind the door, everything. My first thought was hidden cameras. We checked the master bedroom too. Nothing, no signs of surveillance, no obvious explanation. Our third friend didn't stay much longer. She made up an excuse about needing to leave early and got out of there as fast as she could. Later, she texted me and said she couldn't explain it, but the house made her feel deeply uncomfortable, and that was why she left. That's when it really sank in. She hadn't seen the house at its worst. She hadn't experienced the filth that we originally blamed for the feeling. By the time she arrived, the house looked almost normal, clean, livable, and yet she felt the same thing we had. The man who owned the house was there both days. He stayed in the basement the entire time. We were told not to clean down there because it was unfinished, so we never went down. We barely saw him. He never interacted with us. He just stayed below, out of sight. Nothing else happened after that. We finished the job, got paid, and never went back. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that master bathroom. I don't know why all three of us felt watched. I don't know why the feeling intensified in that one room. I don't know what caused the slap, or if it was somehow my body reacting to stress in a way I've never experienced before. What makes it stick with me isn't just what I felt. It's that we all felt it, independently, without suggestion, without being told what to expect. And that house, even now, when I think about it, I don't think about how dirty it was. I think about how it felt, like something bad had soaked into the walls and never left.